Pakistan International Airlines Flight 8303, a fatal error over Karachi. A routine flight turned tragic. On May 22, 2020, Pakistan International Airlines, PIA, Flight 8303, an Airbus A320-0214 registered as APB-LD, took off from Allama Iqbal International Airport, LHE, in Lahore at 13:05 local time. The scheduled domestic flight was carrying 91 passengers and 8 crew members, heading toward its destination, Jinnah International Airport, KHI, in Karachi. The captain in command was Sajjad Gul, an experienced pilot with over 1700 flight hours, while the first officer was Usman Azam, who had over 3,000 hours of flight experience. The flight progressed normally at cruising altitude, with the cockpit crew engaging in casual conversation unrelated to flight operations. Something that would later be flagged as a violation of Cockpit Resource Management, CRM, protocols. Approach to Karachi. US Flight 8303. Neared Karachi, Air Traffic Control (ATC) informed the pilots that they were too high for a normal approach. Instead of initiating a standard holding pattern or a proper descent, the pilots rushed the approach, bringing the aircraft down at a dangerously steep angle. Compounding the problem, the landing gear was never deployed during the first landing attempt. Despite multiple automated warnings and ATC alerts, the pilots proceeded with the landing as if the gear were extended. At 14:35 local time, the Airbus A320 touched down on runway 25L, on its engines instead of its wheels. The force of impact caused the engines to scrape against the runway, sending sparks flying and severely damaging the aircraft's power plants. The aircraft briefly bounced back into the air before the pilots initiated a go-around, but the damage had already been done. Loss of power. A desperate mayday call. During the go-around, both CFM56 engines failed due to internal damage sustained in the belly landing attempt. With no functional engines and the aircraft unable to maintain altitude, Captain Gould declared a mayday, reporting engine failure. The ATC frantically advised the crew to attempt another emergency landing at Karachi Airport, but with no thrust available, the aircraft was rapidly losing height. At 14:39, just 4 minutes after the failed landing attempt, Flight 8303 plummeted into the densely populated Model Colony neighborhood, approximately 1.5 km, 0.93 mm, from the runway threshold. The crash ignited massive fires, destroying several houses and vehicles in the residential area. The aftermath. Devastation and tragedy of the 99 people on board, 97 were killed instantly. Miraculously, 2 passengers survived. Bank executive Zafar Masood and engineer Mohammed Zubair, both suffering burns and fractures. The crash also resulted in injuries and fatalities on the ground, with several homes reduced to rubble. Investigation and findings. The Pakistan Civil Aviation Authority, SCAA, and Airbus launched an immediate investigation, later joined by France's BEA, Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, and other aviation safety bodies. The final report concluded that the accident was primarily due to pilot error. The crew ignored multiple ATC warnings about their excessive altitude during approach. Failure to deploy landing gear. The pilots never extended the landing gear, leading to a direct impact on the engines. CRM failures. The pilots engaged in casual, non-operational conversation during crucial flight phases, violating CRM protocols. Misjudgment and poor decision-making. Instead of aborting and re-attempting the approach properly, the crew rushed the landing, leading to catastrophic consequences. Critical errors in flight operations. The crash of Pakistan International Airlines Flight 8303 was the result of a series of critical operational errors by the flight crew, which ultimately led to total engine failure and the loss of the aircraft. These errors began during the approach phase and escalated due to poor decision-making, misjudgment, and a lack of adherence to standard operating procedures, SOPs. 1. Ignoring air traffic control. ATC warnings. As Flight 8303 approached Jinnah International Airport, AKHI, Karachi's air traffic controllers, ATC, noticed that the aircraft was too high for a normal descent profile. The ATC immediately advised the crew to adjust their altitude and descend earlier to ensure a safe approach. However, instead of following standard procedures, the pilots disregarded the ATC's instructions and continued descending at an excessive rate in an attempt to land the aircraft quickly. This reckless maneuver put the aircraft in an unstable approach configuration, making it difficult to execute a safe landing. The Airbus A320 was still at over 7,000 feet, while it should have been at around 3,000 feet at that phase of the descent. This aggressive descent rate contributed to high-speed approach instability, leaving little margin for correction. 2. Failure to deploy landing gear. One of the most critical mistakes made by the pilots was failing to lower the landing gear before touching down. The Airbus A320 is equipped with multiple visual and oral alerts that warn the crew if the landing gear is not extended. But these warnings were either ignored or not properly acknowledged by the pilots. As a result, at 14:35 local time, when the aircraft made contact with runway 25L, it landed directly on its two engine nacelles instead of its wheels. This catastrophic error caused the engines to scrape against the asphalt, sending sparks flying and damaging internal components, including the compressor blades and oil lines, making them prone to imminent failure. 3. Risky go-around attempt after engine damage. Realizing their mistake, the pilots quickly initiated a go-around to try and circle back for another landing attempt. However, the engines had sustained severe structural damage from the high-speed friction against the runway surface by this point. Key components, including the high-pressure turbines, had been compromised, leading to an immediate loss of power. Despite briefly regaining altitude, both engines failed within minutes of takeoff due to oil depletion and internal overheating. The aircraft, now in an irreversible descent, was unable to reach the runway before crashing into a densely populated residential area. Conclusion: a series of avoidable mistakes. Had the pilots followed standard approach procedures, extended the landing gear and heeded ATC warnings, this accident could have been prevented. Instead, their overconfidence, miscommunication, and failure to recognize critical errors in time led to a catastrophic chain of events, resulting in the deaths of 97 out of 99 people on board, and additional casualties on the ground. The Flight 8303 disaster remains a sobering lesson in aviation safety, emphasizing the importance of strict adherence to protocols, effective communication, and situational awareness, to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Legacy and lessons learned. The Flight 8303 disaster remains one of Pakistan's deadliest aviation accidents, serving as a stark reminder of the critical importance of adherence to standard operating procedures, SOPs, effective communication, and CRM discipline. Following the crash, PIA and the CAA revamped pilot training programs, emphasizing strict adherence to approach procedures and emergency response protocols. Despite the tragedy, the miraculous survival of 2 passengers symbolizes hope amid devastation, while the lessons learned aim to prevent such disasters in the future.